He saw his poor maid collapsed in the rain. The ruthless mafia boss stopped dead in his tracks. Rain poured down in thick, unrelenting sheets, turning the cobblestone streets of the city into slick rivers of silver light. Neon signs flickered above, their colors reflecting off the puddles as if the night itself were bleeding. The city was alive with whispers, secrets, and shadows, and somewhere among them moved Lucien Veyron, the man everyone feared and obeyed. He was a figure carved from legends, known for his ruthless control over the city's underworld. His black coat clung to his broad shoulders and his sharp eyes scanned the street, calculating, cold, and unyielding. No one dared cross him and most didn't even try. Yet tonight, Lucien did not notice the usual crowd of trembling men or the silent respect in every glance. His mind was elsewhere, occupied by deals and plans that could secure his empire for years to come. He walked alone, his boots clicking against the wet stones, the sound swallowed by the storm around him. Then he saw her. She was collapsed in the rain, small and fragile against the torrent. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her frame, and her dark hair plastered to her pale face. For a moment Lucien stopped. His world, normally so sharp and precise, faltered. It had been years since he had paused, years since anything other than power had mattered. Her lips trembled and she shivered violently. She looked so utterly alone, so vulnerable, and something inside him, something he had long buried, stirred. He felt a pull he could not name. For a man who had never known weakness, seeing her like this was dangerous. Yet he could not turn away. Without thinking, he strode toward her. His shadow fell over her and she flinched, lifting a hand as if to push him away. But he knelt down, ignoring the rain that drenched him to the bone, and looked into her eyes. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, cautious, and unfamiliar even to himself. She shook her head, teeth chattering. I can manage," she stammered, though her voice was barely audible over the rain. Lucien's eyes narrowed. "You are in no condition to manage." "You will come with me," her brows furrowed. I shouldn't, no arguments." His tone left no room for debate. Despite her hesitation, there was a firmness in him that brooked no refusal. Slowly she allowed him to help her to her feet, and he supported her as they moved through the wet streets. Each step was careful. He did not let her stumble. No one in the alley spoke. The city had learned that Lucien Veyron did not notice them, and they certainly did not intervene. But in this moment, he was not the feared mafia boss. He was simply a man, caught in a storm, carrying someone fragile and alive in his arms. When they reached his mansion, a grand structure of dark stone and tall, shadowed windows, he did not let go. The guards stationed at the massive doors froze as he passed, seeing the unfamiliar sight, their master concerned for another human being. Inside, warmth enveloped them, and the smell of polished wood and burning fire replaced the cold wetness of the streets. Lucien gently placed her on a chair near the fireplace. She sank into it like a weary bird finally resting its wings. "Sit," he instructed softly. "You cannot move until you are dry." She looked at him, eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and fear. He was a man she had served from a distance, a figure who had never smiled at her, never spoken a kind word. And yet here he was, worried for her as if her life mattered more than anything else in the world. Lucien turned his gaze away, unwilling to let her see the faint flicker of emotion crossing his face. He gestured to one of his men. "Bring her a blanket and some dry clothes." "Yes, sir," the man replied, bowing, though he too seemed unsure of how to react. As the door closed behind them, Lucien finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He leaned against the mantel, watching the flames dance, and tried to understand what had happened. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside him, a chaos of feelings he had not faced in years. He had been unyielding, untouchable, and cold. And now, standing beside that small, fragile woman, he felt a vulnerability that was almost painful. Isolde, for her part, tried to gather her strength. She shivered under the blanket, her wet clothes long since replaced. She had known fear, hardship, and coldness her entire life. But there was something in the way Lucian looked at her, something that was not cruelty, not command, but attention. Pure, unsettling attention that made her heartbeat quicken. I am fine now," she said softly, though her voice wavered. "Don't lie to me," Lucian said, his voice sharper now. He took a step closer and she instinctively shrank back. "If you are cold, you will stay near the fire. You will eat and then you will rest. I will not allow you to suffer on my watch." There was something in the way he spoke, a mix of authority and care that confused her. She had spent years being invisible, ignored, and yet here she was, under the gaze of the most feared man in the city, and he was concerned. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside, the mansion seemed to create a world apart. Lucian did not leave her side, though he attended to other matters silently. He did not speak unless necessary, but his presence was enough to keep her from drifting into fear or despair. By midnight, Isolde finally dared to look at him fully. She saw the sharp lines of his face softened by the flickering firelight, the way his eyes, so often cold and calculating, now seemed thoughtful, almost human. She wanted to speak, to ask why he cared, but the words would not come. Lucian, on the other hand, could not stop thinking. Thoughts he had buried deep, thoughts of loneliness, loss, and the heavy burden of power, surfaced like shadows clawing at the edges of his mind. He had never let anyone close, not for years, not even for moments such as these. And now he felt a pull toward her that frightened him more than any rival ever could. A sudden sound shattered the quiet, the distant echo of footsteps in the rain. Lucian's body tensed immediately, every muscle alert. He moved to the window, peering into the dark streets. A shadow flitted past, fast and deliberate. His eyes narrowed. The storm outside masked the figure, but Lucian's instincts told him this was no ordinary passerby. He turned back to Isolde. Her small frame was curled beneath the blanket, oblivious to the danger looming outside. The thought of her alone, unprotected, sent a surge of determination through him. "She cannot be harmed," he whispered to himself. His voice was a low growl, a vow. Not tonight, not ever. Yet deep in the shadows something stirred. A presence, unseen but felt, watched the mansion with intent. It knew of Lucian's weaknesses, though he had none, not until now. And it sensed the small, fragile spark of life that had entered his world, threatening to unravel the careful control he had built over years of fear and power. Lucian did not see it yet, but the storm had brought more than rain and wind. It had brought the unexpected, the fragile life of a maid, collapsed in the rain, into the heart of a man who had never known softness. And with that, the world shifted ever so slightly, setting events in motion that neither he nor Isolde could yet understand. The fire crackled. The rain lashed the windows, and Lucian Veyron, the ruthless mafia boss, found himself watching over someone not out of command or obligation, but because he could not stop himself. Outside, the shadow lingered, waiting for the right moment. And inside, the first threads of a bond, fragile and dangerous, began to form. The rain had slowed, leaving the city dripping and glistening in the first pale light of morning. But inside Lucian Veyron's mansion, warmth and quiet filled the rooms like a soft, protective veil. The fire in the great hearth crackled, sending shadows dancing along the walls, painting the polished stone with flickering shapes. Isolde sat wrapped in a thick blanket, staring at the flames. She had been allowed to change into dry clothes, simple but warm, and she shivered less now. Yet her mind could not stop racing. Her life had never been like this, never protected, never cared for in such a strange and powerful way. And the man who stood across the room, silent and watchful, only made the mystery deepen. Lucian moved through the grand hall with the calm precision of a predator, but tonight he was different. He did not bark orders or demand attention. Instead, he observed. The house was still under his control, yet his thoughts were elsewhere, circling around the small figure before him. Her presence made the mansion feel less empty, less cold, and more like a place that could hold life instead of power alone. "You must eat," he said finally, his voice low, almost gentle. "You cannot survive on an empty stomach, not now." Isolde hesitated, then nodded. She felt the warmth of the fire and the strange authority in his words. Though she had served him in passing before, she had never heard him speak like this, with concern instead of command. Lucian gestured toward a table nearby. Simple food had been prepared, but it was enough to fill her with comfort. She ate slowly, feeling the heaviness in her chest begin to lift as warmth spread from the food and the fire. And yet she could not shake the feeling that she had walked into a world far larger and darker than she had ever known, a world ruled by this man, whose reputation made even the boldest tremble. After she finished eating, Lucian did not leave. He stood nearby, silent, his expression unreadable. Isolde wondered if he was considering what to do next, or if he was simply watching to make sure she was safe. Finally, she spoke. Why are you helping me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Lucian's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the fire. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his words were careful, almost measured. "Because I cannot allow anyone to be hurt in my city without reason, especially not someone under my roof." She studied him, trying to understand the man who had seemed untouchable, untamed, and cold beyond measure. There was a sharpness in his eyes, yes, but also something deeper, something almost human. For hours they stayed in that quiet rhythm. Lucian moved through the mansion to attend to his duties, but he returned often to check on her. And every time he returned, Isolde noticed a subtle shift, a softening in the lines of his face, a fleeting warmth in his gaze. Later, as curiosity overtook her fear, Isolde wandered quietly through the mansion, careful not to disturb him. She passed vast portraits of Lucian's ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Something about this house, these portraits, and the firelight made the air feel heavy, like history itself was alive in the walls. Her eyes fell upon a door partially hidden behind a tall tapestry. It was slightly ajar. She felt a strange pull toward it, a whisper in her mind telling her to look. Slowly, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, filled with objects she could not understand. There were strange relics, old manuscripts, and artifacts that seemed to hum with a faint energy. As she moved closer, she realized these were not ordinary objects. They were linked to something powerful, something ancient. Her hand hovered over an ornate blackened box. The carvings on its surface twisted and curled like living shadows. She could feel a pulse, faint but persistent, like the heartbeat of a long-forgotten secret. At that moment, Lucian entered the room without a sound. His presence was sudden, commanding, yet not angry. He stepped close behind her, his eyes narrowing at the open box. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, but his tone was not cruel. "Some things in this house are not meant for everyone to see." Isolde turned, startled. I didn't mean to." "You didn't," he interrupted, his voice steady. "But you have a curiosity that is dangerous, and yet I do not forbid it." She looked at him, confusion and awe in her eyes. Why show me anything at all? Why not just leave me to my duties?" Lucian sighed, a rare sound that seemed almost like exhaustion. "Because there is more to this world than obedience and fear. And perhaps, because you might see what others cannot. You might understand what others refuse to acknowledge." His words hung in the air, heavy and mysterious. Isolde could feel that there was a story here, a secret buried deep in the walls of this mansion, in the blood of this family, and in the eyes of the man who had saved her from the rain. Hours passed and the storm outside began to fade completely. The city was now quiet, the streets glistening under the early sun, but inside the mansion, tension and curiosity simmered. Lucian finally led her back to the main hall. "You should rest," he said. Tomorrow will bring more challenges than you can imagine. Isolde felt a chill, not from the air but from his words. Challenges. She had no idea what he meant, yet she trusted in some small way that he would protect her. As she prepared to sleep, she noticed him standing by the fire once more, his gaze distant, troubled. There was a weight in his shoulders she had never seen in anyone, not in his men, not in his rivals. He carried not just power but history, expectation, and perhaps guilt. But then the unexpected happened. The silence was broken by a faint sound at the edge of the mansion, a whisper of movement in the trees, the distant click of boots on wet stone. Lucian's head snapped toward the window, his instincts sharp and immediate. The shadow of a figure moved quickly across the garden, hidden partially by the morning mist. Lucian's expression hardened. His calm demeanor vanished, replaced by the unmistakable intensity of a man who had faced danger countless times before. "Someone is here," he muttered. "And they mean to test us." Isolde froze. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. For the first time she realized that the world she had stepped into was not safe, not by a long shot. And yet she felt a strange sense of belonging standing here under his protection, knowing that he would not let anyone harm her. Lucian approached her quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder, firm but not frightening. "You must remain inside," he said. "Do not venture out." "Trust me?" She nodded, but the storm of fear and curiosity in her mind made sleep impossible. She lay on the couch near the fire, listening to the faint echoes of movement outside, and thinking of the mysterious relics, the box, and the shadow that had appeared. In that quiet, uneasy hour, she began to understand that her life had changed. She was no longer just a maid, unnoticed and dismissed. She had entered a world of power, secrets, and danger. And at the center of it all was a man who could destroy cities with a word, yet chose to protect her. Lucian, for his part, did not sleep either. He watched the windows, every sense alert. The small, fragile figure wrapped in a blanket had stirred something in him, a reminder that even the strongest walls could be broken, even the coldest hearts could feel. He did not understand it, and perhaps he never would. But one thing was certain. She had entered his life and nothing would ever be the same again. And outside the mansion, the shadow lingered, silent and patient. It had watched everything, the rescue, the care, the small but significant bond forming between them. It knew that the time would come when it could strike. But for now, it waited, knowing that the storm within the mansion was only beginning. Lucian glanced toward Isolde one last time before the morning light grew too strong. Her small figure, asleep and vulnerable, stirred something deep within him, something he had thought lost to the years of cruelty, control, and solitude. He clenched his fists, the firelight glinting off the rings on his fingers. "She is mine to protect," he whispered, not aloud, but as a vow to the night, to himself, and to the dangerous world that sought to test them. And so the day began in the mansion, quiet yet charged with unspoken tension. Secrets waited to be revealed, dangers lurked beyond the walls, and the fragile bond between the ruthless mafia boss and the maid he had saved began to grow, subtle but undeniable, like the first light of dawn breaking through storm clouds. Outside, the city gleamed wet and bright, unaware of the storm of power, mystery, and emerging connection within one of its most feared buildings. And in the shadows, someone watched, knowing that this bond, once broken, could change everything. The city was waking slowly under a pale morning sun. Its streets, still wet from the storm, glimmered like rivers of silver. But Lucien Veyron's mansion was a world apart, silent, heavy, and filled with the tension of hidden things. Isolde had spent the night restless, thoughts of the previous day replaying in her mind. The warmth of the fire, the care Lucien had shown, and the mysterious objects in the secret room, all of it felt like stepping into a new world. One that was thrilling, terrifying, and strangely comforting at the same time. Lucien, for his part, was already awake, walking the halls of his mansion with quiet, purposeful steps. The shadow that had lingered outside the previous night had vanished, but he knew it would return. The city was never safe for those who stood in the way of power. And now, with Isolde under his care, he had something else to protect, someone fragile yet vital in ways he had not expected. By mid-morning, he called Isolde to the grand study, a room lined with shelves of old books, maps of the city, and objects that hinted at his family's long history. He gestured for her to sit across from him, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "You must understand," he began, his voice steady but soft, "that the world outside these walls is dangerous. People do not act with kindness and power is taken, not given." Isolde nodded, her fingers clasped in her lap. She had learned this lesson long ago in her own small way, surviving hardships without anyone to rely on. But now, sitting here with him, she realized there was more to danger than she had ever imagined. More cunning, more cruelty, and more shadows. Lucian continued, "You will need to learn how to protect yourself, not with weapons alone, but with awareness, intelligence, and courage. The city will test you, and those tests will not forgive mistakes." Isolde looked up at him, surprised. Are you asking me to stay here to learn?" He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, I will not allow you to face the streets unprepared, not when you belong here in my care." The words struck her in a way she had not expected. Belonging, care. These were things she had never truly known. Her life had been a series of duties, of obedience, of being unseen. And now she realized for the first time that someone saw her, not just as a servant but as a person worth protecting. Over the next few days, their routine began. Lucian instructed her in the ways of the mansion, teaching her about the hidden passages, the safe rooms, and the methods of observation he used to maintain control over his empire. The lessons were practical, but beneath them there was an unspoken exchange, a quiet recognition of trust and understanding forming between them. Isolde, in turn, began to notice the man behind the power. Lucian was ruthless, yes, feared by all, but she glimpsed moments of vulnerability, moments when his guard was down, when he allowed himself to care. And these glimpses were dangerous, for both of them, because they made her heart beat faster and made him feel emotions he had long suppressed. One evening, Lucian led her to the secret room she had discovered earlier. He opened the blackened box, and Isolde leaned closer, curiosity overpowering caution. Inside were objects that shimmered faintly in the firelight, relics, charms, and ancient manuscripts that seemed to hold secrets older than the city itself. "These are not mere possessions," Lucian said, his voice low and reverent. "They are part of my family's history. Some hold knowledge, some hold warnings. You must understand that the past is never truly gone. It follows us, shapes us, and sometimes it demands repayment." Isolde shivered slightly. The objects seemed to hum with energy, almost alive. Do they have power?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucian's eyes darkened. "Power and danger. Some things in this world are beyond comprehension, beyond control, and yet they shape who we are. That is why I guard them and why you must understand them if you are to stay here." Her mind reeled, but she nodded. She trusted him. She had no choice but to trust him, and somehow that trust felt right even as it frightened her. Days passed, blending into nights. Lucian continued to teach, but he also watched. Every movement she made, every question she asked, drew him closer in ways he did not fully understand. He found himself noticing the smallest details, the way her eyes widened with curiosity, the slight hesitation in her voice, the way she leaned forward when listening intently. And Isolde, for her part, began to see a side of him that few ever witnessed. The sharpness in his eyes softened when she was near. The harsh lines of his face relaxed when she smiled, faint though it might be. And yet for all this, there was always a barrier, a sense of distance that reminded her he was still the powerful, untouchable man she had first feared. One night, as they walked through the mansion's gardens, now blooming in the aftermath of the storm, Lucian paused. The moonlight reflected off the wet leaves, and the air was heavy with the scent of flowers and rain. He looked at her, and for a moment the mask of the ruthless boss slipped. "You are stronger than you realize," he said quietly. "Even when you doubt yourself, even when you are afraid, there is strength in you that many would never see. I notice it, and it matters." Isolde's heart fluttered. She had never heard such words directed at her before, not from a friend, not from anyone. I don't know what to say," she whispered, looking down. "Then say nothing," Lucian replied, his tone firm but gentle. "Just remember it." Their walk ended, but the tension lingered, unspoken and electric. Neither wanted to break the silence, for the silence itself was filled with meaning. It was a shared acknowledgement of connection, trust, and a growing bond neither could yet name. Yet, life in the mansion was not without danger. Rumors had reached Lucian's ears that rival factions were moving, probing for weakness. And the shadow that had lingered the night of the storm had returned, unseen but palpable. Lucian could feel it, could sense it watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, while Isolde was tending to her duties quietly in the kitchen, a sudden noise outside caught Lucian's attention. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and too close for coincidence. He moved like a shadow himself, silent and swift, to the window. A figure slipped through the mist, approaching the mansion with careful precision. Lucian's eyes narrowed. He knew instantly that this was no ordinary intruder. His hand hovered near the dagger at his belt, not for himself, but to protect the fragile figure inside the house. He moved to Isolde, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Stay inside. Do not move," he commanded, his voice low and tense. She nodded, heart racing, and watched as he slipped out into the shadows. The night air was cold and thick with anticipation. Lucian's movements were precise, controlled, and dangerous. He approached the intruder silently, watching, waiting for the right moment. The figure paused, sensing something, but Lucian was faster. He moved with a speed that belied his size, striking the man with a calculated force that left him stunned but unharmed. Lucian did not kill him. He never killed without reason. But he made his point clear. No one would threaten his home or the woman he had sworn to protect. Returning inside, Lucian found Isolde trembling but safe. He knelt before her, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "You are safe," he said, the words more than a promise. They were a vow. She looked at him, a mixture of fear and admiration in her eyes. You saved me," she whispered. "I will continue to save you," he replied, his voice steady, but something in it hinted at more than duty. "As long as I draw breath." The night passed, and the mansion settled into an uneasy quiet. Isolde lay in her bed, thinking of the shadow, the storm, and the strange, protective man who had become her guardian. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a fragile thread of safety in a world that had never offered her such comfort. Lucian, meanwhile, watched from the study window. The city stretched out before him, dark and endless, full of danger, secrets, and hidden threats. And yet, for all its shadows, the small, fragile figure asleep in his mansion had become the center of his world, a light he did not understand but could not ignore. And somewhere beyond the walls, the shadow that had stalked them both waited, patient and silent. It had seen the bond forming, the trust growing, and it knew that when the time came, the test would be far greater than either of them had faced. Lucian clenched his fists. He would not fail. He would not allow harm to touch her. And for the first time in years, he realized that power alone was not enough. Protection required more: awareness, strategy, and perhaps something he had never allowed himself to feel: a heart capable of care, connection, and vulnerability. The storm outside had ended, but within the mansion, the tension, the trust, and the bond between the ruthless mafia boss and the fragile maid were only beginning to grow. And the world beyond would not wait for them to be ready. The city was cloaked in mist and silence, the streets slick from another brief rain. Even in daylight, the alleys seemed dangerous, and shadows lingered as if waiting for someone to falter. But Lucien Veyron's mansion, perched atop the hill, was a fortress of light and warmth. And inside, the tension had reached a peak. The previous events weighed heavily on Lucien. The shadow that had stalked the mansion, the rival factions testing his strength, and the lingering power of his family's ancient relics, all combined into a storm more dangerous than any he had faced in years. But this time, he was not alone. Isolde had become more than a quiet maid under his protection. She had grown in strength and awareness, learning quickly from him about strategy, vigilance, and observation. She moved with confidence through the mansion, alert and careful, yet her presence brought something new into the cold walls: warmth. Lucien had watched her carefully. He noticed the smallest changes, the way she carried herself, how her voice was firmer, how her eyes were bright with curiosity and courage. And he realized something he had long buried. He cared for her deeply, not as a possession, not as someone to command, but as a person who had changed him. The morning began with a quiet, deceptive calm. Lucien was reviewing the layout of the mansion and the surrounding streets, planning for the possibility of another intrusion. Isolde watched him, knowing the storm that lay ahead was inevitable. "Lucien," she said softly, stepping closer, "do you think the shadow will come back?" He paused, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment there was a softness in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability. "Yes," he admitted, "but we will be ready, together." The word resonated with her. Together, it carried weight and promise. But before she could respond, a sudden sound shattered the calm, the unmistakable noise of footsteps on wet stone outside the gates. Lucien moved instantly, swift and silent, and gestured for Isolde to stay behind him. The gates burst open and figures emerged from the mist, rival operatives, armed with the intention to threaten, to intimidate, to break the fortress Lucien had built. But he did not flinch. This time he did not hesitate. "You will not harm anyone here," he said, his voice low but commanding, carrying a weight that made the intruders hesitate. The leader of the group, cloaked in black, stepped forward. "Lucien Veyron," he said, his tone mocking, "your empire is over. The girl is weak, she cannot protect herself." Lucien's eyes darkened. The words sparked something he had long suppressed, a fire fueled not by anger alone but by the need to protect. His hands moved swiftly, signaling to Isolde. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice calm but urgent. Isolde obeyed instinctively. She had learned from him, grown under his guidance, and now she moved with purpose. Together they were more than master and maid, they were allies, a team bound by trust and necessity. The first clash was sudden. Lucien moved with precision, incapacitating one intruder with a swift motion, while another tried to advance from behind. Isolde reacted instinctively, her hands grabbing objects from nearby furniture, using them to block and distract. She was not a fighter by training, but her courage and quick thinking turned the tide in moments. Lucien glanced at her, a flash of pride crossing his face. "Good," he murmured under his breath, then shifted focus back to the remaining threat. The leader drew a knife, stepping closer. "This is your end, Lucien," he sneered. But Lucien's movements were too fast, too calculated. He disarmed the man, forcing him to the ground, and stood over him, tall and unyielding. "You misjudge strength," Lucien said, his voice low and dangerous. "Strength is not in weapons alone. It is in strategy, courage, and the heart to protect those who matter." The remaining operatives fled, realizing they could not match him and the woman who had grown strong by his side. Silence returned, heavy and still, broken only by the distant sound of rain dripping from the eaves. Lucien turned to Isolde. She was breathing heavily, her hands shaking slightly, but her eyes were bright with triumph. You did well," he said, "better than I expected." She looked at him, a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "We did it," she corrected softly, realizing the truth of it. Lucien studied her, and for a long moment, the shadows of the past, the family curse, and the countless years of ruthless power seemed to fade. He realized that for the first time in decades, he was not alone in facing the dangers of his world. And he realized something even more profound. He could trust her, rely on her, and care for her without fear. Later that evening, they returned to the mansion, the tension of the day still lingering in the air. Lucian led Isolde to the secret room, the place where relics and history mingled. He opened the blackened box again, revealing the ancient manuscripts and charms that had long been a source of power and danger. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "The past is not gone. It watches, it waits, and it tests us. But we are not powerless. Together we can face it, and we can change what has been set before us." Isolde stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the box. "I understand," she said softly. "And I want to help. I want to stand with you." Lucian looked at her, and something in his chest shifted. He felt the full weight of emotion he had suppressed for so long, protectiveness, admiration, and a deep, growing care. "Then stand," he said simply. "Stand with me, and know that you are not alone anymore." The days that followed were quiet but filled with a new rhythm. Lucian and Isolde worked together to secure the mansion, plan for contingencies, and uncover more secrets of the past. Each day brought them closer, not through words of love or confession, but through trust, understanding, and shared experience. Lucian began to see the world differently, guided not by fear or control, but by connection and care. And Isolde, in turn, saw him as more than a ruthless boss. She saw the man who had saved her, taught her, and valued her courage and intelligence. One night, as rain began to fall once again, they walked together through the gardens. The storm mirrored the one from the night she had first collapsed, but this time it felt different, less threatening, more cleansing. The sound of raindrops on leaves was soothing, almost like a lullaby. Lucian stopped and looked at her. "You have changed my life," he admitted quietly. "I thought I was invincible, untouchable, alone, but you have shown me something different, something I cannot ignore." Isolde met his gaze, her heart fluttering. "And you've changed mine," she whispered. "You've shown me strength, courage, and that even the strongest can care." For a long moment they stood together, rain soaking their hair and clothes, yet neither moved. The world around them seemed to pause. And then Lucian took a step closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are safe," he said, "and I will keep you safe always, no matter what comes." She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and trust. "I know," she said. "I feel it." The storm began to fade, leaving the city glistening in the light of a rising sun. For the first time, Lucian allowed himself to hope, to imagine a future not dominated by fear or shadows, but by trust, courage, and connection. And in the quiet aftermath, he realized that his family's curse, the years of ruthlessness, and the loneliness he had carried for so long were not invincible. They could be faced, understood, and even transformed by the bonds we choose, the courage we show, and the hearts we allow to enter our own. The mansion was calm. The city stretched out beyond it, full of secrets, dangers, and possibilities. And within its walls, a man who had once ruled through fear, and a woman who had once been invisible had found something neither had expected: redemption, trust, and the first fragile threads of love. But even as they stood together, the shadows of the past remained. There would be challenges still, dangers still, and tests of courage. Yet for the first time they knew they could face them, not alone, not with fear, but together. Lucian watched the sun break over the horizon, rain still dripping from the eaves. He glanced at Isolde standing beside him and felt a rare warmth in his chest. "We are ready," he said softly. Isolde nodded, her hand brushing against his. "Together," she confirmed. And as the city awoke beneath the morning light, the mansion stood as a fortress of hope, trust, and new beginnings, a place where even the coldest hearts could learn to feel, and the most fragile could grow strong. The story of the storm, the shadow, and the fragile bond had reached its first conclusion. But the future, filled with challenges, adventures, and the slow bloom of something more, awaited them. Together. And somewhere in the city, beyond the walls, someone watched. But now Lucian and Isolde were ready. Not just with strength, but with courage, trust, and a heart willing to face the storm.